The coffee was still warm when Rebecca Turner vanished from the lakeside town of Chelan, Washington, population 3,918. The October night of 1979 arrived with thick fog and cold winds sweeping down from the Cascade Range. At 10:45 p.m., the last server at the Blue Heron Tavern saw the 25-year-old leave in her yellow Plymouth Duster, saying she had to get home early to prepare for her morning shift at the local bookstore. Rebecca wore a light blue knit scarf, clutching her old handbag, and stepped out of the tavern as the lights reflected on the still lake. A passerby said the red taillights of her car flickered on the water before fading into the fog. What happened in the next 47 minutes would haunt Chelan for nearly half a century, until the lake gave back what it had kept hidden. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the lakeside road of Chelan that autumn night in 1979, cold mist rose from the lake, mingling with the Cascade fog, wrapping around the dark pine rows and the scattered yellow lights of the small town. Rebecca "Becky" Turner, 25, left the Blue Heron Tavern after her best friend's birthday party. She waved goodbye with a quick smile, saying she had to head home early for her shift at Cascade Books. Over her shoulder was her old leather bag, containing the notebook she always carried. Her yellow Plymouth Duster started up, its engine noise blending with the wind and light rain, then faded around the curve along the lake. A server recalled seeing the red taillights reflect on the water before disappearing into the fog. That was the last time anyone saw Becky alive. The next morning, Chelan's sky was heavy and gray. At the bookstore, the wall clock struck 8, but Becky didn't show. The manager called, no one answered. Her small house, a few miles from town, was locked, bed neatly made, winter coat still hanging behind a chair, and a half-empty coffee mug sat on the kitchen table. No signs of a hurried departure, no note or letter. As calls went unanswered, Becky's parents drove to the lake. They walked the wet grassy slope, where the wind carried the scent of gasoline and cold water. Under the morning fog, only 2 faint tire tracks pressed into the ground, and a thin oil slick drifting near the water's edge remained. No car, no person. As the sun rose higher, fear turned into undeniable truth. That afternoon, the Turner family entered the Chelan police station. The father placed his daughter's photo on the dark wooden desk, his voice hoarse, "She's gone." The officer on duty jotted a few lines in the initial report, unaware they were opening a case that would haunt the town for decades. The next morning, Lake Chelan lay under a fog, thick as a wet blanket. Temperatures dropped, and gusts from the Cascades stirred small waves on the water. As the first light broke through the eastern rocks, the search team gathered at Don Morse Park. Rescue boats were launched, their engines echoing through the gray mist, mixed with the smell of gasoline and cold air. Police Chief Robert Whitman led the team, 17 officers, 2 county divers, and nearly 20 local volunteers. He wore an old brown leather jacket, standing at the shore's edge, holding a map of the area. The faint tire tracks Becky's father found were marked with white paint, stretching a few meters before vanishing at the grass's edge. Nearby, a small piece of glass, tinged with gasoline, lay in the wet mud. No skid marks, no signs of a crash into a guardrail or rock. "Maybe she braked hard and slid into the water," Whitman said, his voice firm. Keller, the youngest officer, crouched to measure the tracks again, shaking his head slightly. "No skid marks, sir. The car went straight, like it was pushed." Whitman didn't respond, only scribbled in his notebook and ordered the dive gear prepared. 2 divers suited up in rubber gear, checking oxygen tanks and dive lights. As they entered the water, the lake's surface rippled outward. 10 meters deep, near zero visibility, crackled the radio. No large metal objects detected. An hour later, the divers returned, faces pale from the cold. Whitman looked up at the dense fog over the lake, his eyes darkening. "Keep scanning the nearshore area with sonar," he ordered. On the screen, wavy patterns appeared, cluttered and unclear. A few faint blips flickered and vanished, maybe rocks or rotten branches. By afternoon, the rain stopped, leaving only lingering mist. Officers set up a temporary crime scene map on a wooden board. The route from the Blue Heron Tavern, the lakeside curve, the area with the tire tracks. Whitman drew a red circle around the suspected spot. If the car went in, it's somewhere here, he said. An officer suggested expanding the search north, but Whitman shook his head. No, we have no evidence she went that way. Beyond the police tape, Becky's parents stood silently watching the boat circle the water. Her mother gripped her husband's hand, lips pressed tight. "She knows how to drive, Robert," she told Whitman as he approached. "She's driven this road her whole life. She wouldn't go into the water like that." Whitman nodded, his voice softer. "I know, but we need evidence before we say anything else." As dusk fell, the boat's spotlights cast long beams across the lake. For a moment, a rescue hook jerked taut, and silence gripped the shore. But when pulled up, it was only the rusted frame of an abandoned skiff. A collective sigh spread along the bank. Local reporters appeared the next day. A young journalist snapped photos of the drenched divers stepping ashore. "No other leads?" he asked. Whitman didn't answer, just climbed into his Jeep, eyes fixed on the lake where fog was swallowing the horizon. Keller stood by a road sign, noting what remained the glass shard, tire tracks, crushed grass. He didn't say it aloud, but doubt simmered within him. If this was just an accident, why no signs of struggle, no skid marks, no crash debris? On the 5th day since Becky Turner vanished, the air in the Chelan police station was thick with damp and stale coffee. The search paused, due to bad weather, but Whitman called in Alan Price, Becky's ex-boyfriend, for questioning. Alan arrived in a soaked wool coat, looking tired and bewildered. About 30, blonde, face gaunt from sleeplessness, he sat with his head bowed, hands clasped. On the table was a photo of Becky taken at the bookstore, her faint smile seeming unrelated to the woman who'd just disappeared. Whitman began, voice even and cold. "You were the last to see Miss Turner that night, correct?" Alan nodded slightly. "We had a small argument. Nothing big. She said I was too controlling. I didn't mean." He stopped, eyes on the photo. "She left first. I stayed for another drink." "What time did you leave the tavern?" "About 10 minutes to 11. Whitman flipped through the report, glancing at the server's note. Becky left at 10:45, Alan at 10:47. A 2-minute gap, but to Whitman it meant nothing. He closed the notebook, staring at Alan. "Did you follow her?" Alan flinched. "No, I went home. I live 6 miles away up the hill." "Anyone confirm that?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I live alone." Keller leaned against the wall, watching silently. He noticed Alan's right hand trembling as he held a water glass, but his eyes showed no guilt, only fear and confusion. After over an hour of questioning, Whitman let Alan go. Before leaving, Alan turned back. If you think Becky's dead, I want to know why." "She had no enemies." Whitman didn't answer, only said flatly, "If it's an accident, we'll know soon enough." 2 days later, Keller received a new witness report. A resident from the northern outskirts claimed that on the night Becky vanished, he saw a yellow car heading toward Stecken Bridge, 10 miles from the dock, followed by an old police cruiser with its lights off. He couldn't recall the license plate, only noting the county logo reflecting in the moonlight. Keller logged the statement and submitted it. But the next morning, when he checked the file, the report was gone. He confronted Whitman, holding a second copy he'd kept. "This guy said he saw Becky's car followed by another vehicle. Why was the statement removed?" Whitman didn't look up, his voice steady, unreliable witness. "He was drunk. Don't waste time." "But if it's true," Whitman cut him off, his eyes cold as the morning lake. "Keller, this case is done. She lost control. That's all." Keller stayed silent, but the details didn't add up. No skid marks, the broken glass too far from the water. Now a police cruiser reportedly near the scene. In his notebook, he wrote, "Possible pursuit. Witness statement removed. Why?" That afternoon, Alan Price was brought in again, this time with a different tone. Whitman skipped the timeline, cutting to the chase. Did Becky ever seem worried about anything? Alan shook his head. She got harassing calls, a man's voice. I asked, but she wouldn't say, did you note the number? No, she said it was fine. I think it might have been someone in the police. She mentioned that once. Whitman stopped writing, staring at him. The room went quiet, rain tapping the window. You should watch what you say, he replied slowly. No one in my force harasses women. Alan gave a dry, bitter laugh. Then maybe you should ask why she was scared. As Alan left, Keller entered, seeing Whitman burn a scrap of paper in a metal ashtray. Witness report, Whitman said without looking up. Worthless. Thin smoke rose, smelling of burnt paper and tobacco. Keller said nothing, opening his small notebook to add evidence removed. That day, Whitman sent a summary to the county sheriff's office, concluding, no foul play suspected, probable vehicle accident. The cold words on paper seemed to close the case. But as Keller left the office, he glanced through the glass, seeing Whitman alone, staring at the fog-covered lake. The desk lamp lit his face, and for a brief moment, Keller saw something else, not the certainty of a man confident in his conclusion, but the silence of someone hiding something. In his thin notebook, Keller wrote one final line before ending the day. If she was alone, why was there another car? That question would haunt him for years, the first crack in the accident story the town was told. A week later, Lake Chelan returned to its deceptive calm, the water still as a mirror, pine rows casting trembling black shadows under pale sunlight. No more rescue boats, no crowds. Only a few local fishermen went out each morning, including Earl McConnell, a 58-year-old man living in a wooden cabin near Don Morse Park. That morning, he rowed out as usual, anchoring in deep water about 100 yards from shore. Casting his net, he noticed something odd, a faint yellow glimmer below the murky water, where sunlight couldn't reach. At first, I thought it was a barrel or metal frame. Earl later said, but looking closer, I saw it was square like a car's roof. He marked the spot with a small buoy and radioed the police. Something big's at the bottom, near the old dock. You should check it out. Whitman took the call near 10 a.m. He immediately cordoned off the area, summoning the dive team from the initial search. Officer Keller was there. If this is her car, Whitman said, we do this by the book. Two divers in black neoprene suits secured safety lines and slipped into the icy water. Lake Chelan was deep and dark, with nearly half a meter of mud at the bottom. Dive lights swept through the gloom, stirring clouds of silt. After 10 minutes, a voice crackled over the radio. Found an object. Car-shaped yellow. Driver's door sealed shut. Silence gripped the shore. Keller clutched the guardrail. Whitman said softly, mark it. Pull it up. Steel cables were lowered, hooked to the chassis. As the crane tightened, the water bubbled, and slowly, the car's front emerged, coated in mud and algae. Metal glinted through the gray lake. It was the yellow Plymouth Duster, license plate 7C4829. One door was deeply dented, the rear window shattered. As the car reached the shore, the stench of gasoline, mud, and rust filled the air. Whitman signaled no one to open the doors until forensics arrived. But through the front window, Keller saw a figure slumped in the driver's seat, brown hair matted, still buckled in. God, he whispered. The area fell silent. Becky's mother, kept behind the barricade, collapsed at the sight of the yellow paint under the tarp. As the car was pulled from the mud, technicians began photographing. Everything seemed intact. Headlights off, gear in drive, keys in the ignition. Under the passenger seat was a small bag with coins, a waterlogged notebook, and a cracked lipstick. No signs of a struggle, no debris except the glass broken from the inside out. Whitman touched the glass's edge, a sharp piece cutting his finger lightly. He stared at the faint blood, then slipped his hand into his pocket. Forensics noted, impact from interior direction. No external damage, consistent with collision. No skid marks, no crash signs, no reason for the car to slide. Keller circled the car, checking the mud caked on the rear. "This didn't roll down a slope," he said quietly to a colleague. "Someone pushed or pulled it down." But before he could continue, Whitman spoke. "Logged the preliminary accident. No evidence to the contrary." That afternoon, the body was moved to the Wenatchee coroner's office. News spread fast through the town's landlines. Becky Turner was found. People gathered at the lake, watching the convoy pass, silent as in a funeral. At Don Morse Park, only Keller remained, staring at the murky water. Tiny bubbles still rose from where the car was pulled, as if the lake wasn't ready to let go of what it held for 7 days. That night, at the police station, Whitman sat before open files. Beside him was a mud-stained rag from Becky's car. He wrote briefly, "Recovered vehicle, consistent with accident. No external damage, case status, pending autopsy." He closed the file, turned off the lamp, but didn't leave. Outside, wind rattled the glass, rain falling steadily. Keller entered, seeing his boss still seated. "You're calling it an accident?" he asked, voice low. Whitman looked up, eyes weary of the case itself. "Got any other evidence?" Keller didn't answer. He glanced at Becky's photo on the wall, then down at the desk. "No, but something's off." Whitman nodded, voice dry. Off or not, the lake swallowed everything. The next morning, Don Morse Park was empty again. Only crane tracks, some ropes, and dried mud trailing to the road remained. In the official file, "Missing person" was crossed out, replaced with 2 colder final words, "Deceased female." Chelan's missing case officially became a death. A neat, orderly conclusion. But for those who saw the car, for Keller, and perhaps even Whitman, what rose from the lake that day wasn't just a woman's body, but the start of something stirring deeper in the shadows of the water. At the Wenatchee Hospital's morgue, that morning was steeped in the smell of chemicals and the clink of metal. Becky Turner's body lay on a stainless steel table, covered by a white sheet soaked with lake water. Outside, light rain fell, droplets streaking the glass like the lake itself was still falling. Dr. Harlan Lewis, the county's chief coroner, a lean, quiet man in his 50s, pulled on rubber gloves, adjusted his mask, and nodded to his 2 assistants. "Start recording," he said. An old 16mm camera whirred in the corner, its lens fixed on the body of the young woman. Pale skin, matted hair, hands still clenched, as if grasping something in vain. Lewis carefully removed the white sheet. "Estimated time of death, 7 to 8 days, he said slowly, his voice steady as if lecturing in a medical classroom. He examined the neck first, fractures at C3 and C4 vertebrae, clean breaks, no signs of tissue healing. Couldn't be caused by water impact. The force from a fall at this height isn't enough to break the neck." The assistant scribbled every word. Next he opened the trachea, leaned in to inspect, then frowned slightly. No foam, no mud, no algae residue. She didn't inhale water when submerged, meaning she was dead before entering the lake. The operating room was deathly silent, save for the faint sound of the scalpel slicing through skin and metal clinking on a tray. Lewis continued to the head. A circular bruise, about an inch in diameter, marked the back of the neck. He measured it, noting circular, likely caused by a blunt hard object, consistent with a strong blow from behind. He paused, looking at the young woman's face, blurred by time in the water, and shook his head slightly. "Not an accident," he said to himself. By noon, the preliminary report was complete. Neck injury likely from external force, death before submersion, bruise from a blunt object. Lewis sat at his desk, typing on the typewriter. As the draft emerged on paper, he reviewed each line meticulously, missing no detail. Under conclusion, he typed, "Recommend criminal investigation." He signed, stamped, and placed the original in a case envelope. Late that afternoon, Whitman appeared at the morgue's door, unannounced. The yellow light cast a cold, hard shadow on his face, like the lake on a rainy night. "I need to see the report," he said. Lewis looked up, surprised. "It's preliminary. I'll send the official one tomorrow." Whitman gave a faint smile. "Just want to make sure it aligns with what the public's told." Lewis removed his gloves, wiped his hands, and handed over a copy. Whitman skimmed it, pausing at the line "possible homicide." He frowned. "You sure? She could have broken her neck when the car hit the water. That depth, the impact's strong enough." "No," Lewis replied calmly. "The fracture angle doesn't match a fall, and there's no water in her lungs. She was dead before submersion. I believe there was external intervention." Whitman looked up, his eyes icing over. "You know how the media works. Small town, people panic. We don't want a storm." Lewis was silent for a moment, then said softly, "Pressure can't change the truth." The next day, when Lewis arrived at the hospital, the original case envelope was gone from the storage cabinet. In its place was another copy, retyped, with "possible homicide" erased. Instead, a new line in black ink read, "Death by drowning post-collision." Lewis froze. He checked closely, realizing the signature at the bottom was still his name, but the pen strokes were stiff and shaky, not his own. He called his secretary, Janet Lewis, asking her to back up the original autopsy footage. "Don't let anyone touch that tape," he instructed. Janet heard his voice drop, sensing something was wrong. By afternoon, when he returned, the film reel from the camera was also gone. The cabinet drawer was ajar, the lock twisted. Only a torn piece of film remained on the floor. Lewis confronted Whitman at the police station. He slapped the report copy on the desk, his voice sharp, a rare edge. "Who altered my report?" Whitman leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the paper. "Got proof? Maybe you signed the wrong form. We just standardized the documents." "You're breaking protocol, Robert. This is evidence tampering." Whitman's lips curled slightly, voice low. "And you're forgetting I'm leading this investigation." He stood, stepping closer, each word deliberate. "She's dead, and it's over. Don't make it a second tragedy." Lewis left the office, unease gnawing at him. Back at his desk, he wrote a handwritten memo, tucked it into his personal notebook. Autopsy report, altered. Signs of death before submersion. No water in lungs. Further investigation needed. He folded it, sealed it, and stored it in his private cabinet drawer, hoping someone would find it one day. As night fell, the town church's bell echoed through the fog. Whitman signed the final report and sent it off. The conclusion was as cold as the lake under his pen. Cause of death, drowning due to vehicular impact. Case, accidental. Outside, wind rattled the hallway, extinguishing the desk lamp. In the dark, a paper slipped to the floor, its faint rustle the only sound left of a truth just buried. The next morning, the Chelan police station felt strangely heavy. News of finding Becky Turner's body had spread, but what troubled Officer Tom Keller wasn't public grief. It was the new autopsy report on his desk. Cleanly printed, no erasures, no notes. The final conclusion read clearly, "Death by drowning post-collision." Keller read it twice, then looked toward Chief Whitman's office. The door was shut, light seeped through the crack, faint as lake mist. He stood, file in hand, and entered. "Sir, I need to ask about this report." Whitman looked up from his papers, voice calm. "What's the issue, Keller?" "Dr. Lewis's initial report noted death before submersion. I saw the draft, and it mentioned a bruise on the back of the neck in the injury description." Whitman leaned back, hands clasped. "Heard rumors, huh? Only the report I sign is valid." Lewis could have been mistaken. "You say he's wrong, but the autopsy footage is missing too. Do you know about that?" Keller asked, voice slow but firm. Whitman's lips twitched, not answering immediately. He stood, walked to the window overlooking the foggy parking lot. "Keller, you're a good officer, but sometimes being good means knowing when to stay quiet. Understand? You're telling me to look the other way?" Keller replied, heart pounding. Whitman turned, eyes like steel. "I'm telling you not to turn an accident into a witch hunt. Want a transfer to patrol in Winthrop? I can sign it now." Keller went silent. In that moment, he knew this investigation was no longer about truth. He left without another word, but in his mind, fragments pieced together like broken glass, the neck fracture, glass shattered outward, altered report, and now a direct threat. That night, as most officers had gone home, Janet Lewis, the station secretary, stayed late, finalizing the Turner case files. She was meticulous, used to Whitman's demand for neat, clean paperwork. While clearing a cabinet, she found a thin envelope in the case file, unmarked except for Becky's handwritten note. "If something happens to me, look to the lake." She read it repeatedly, heart racing. The slanted, pale blue ink was unmistakably feminine, shaky but resolute. The door swung open, Janet startled, hiding the envelope under papers. Whitman entered, holding safe keys. "Still here? Checking files before sealing, sir." Whitman nodded, approaching the desk, his gaze landing on the open file drawer. "Hand me the Turner file." Janet hesitated. I'm still organizing." "Now," Whitman cut in, voice sharp. She handed it over. He flipped through, pulling the envelope as if he knew exactly where it was. He glanced at it, said nothing, and tucked it into his coat pocket. "Don't log that one," he said, voice low. "We keep what's relevant, discard what causes confusion." He left, the door clicking shut. Janet sat frozen, sweat beading on her forehead. She'd just witnessed something wrong, her instincts screaming to stay silent. Later, she stood, locked the door, and pulled out her personal notebook. She scribbled, "Tonight, 9:15. Whitman took document from office. Victim's letter, no longer in file." That night, she returned to the copy room. Becky's letter was seared into her memory. Every line, every word. She rewrote it by hand, mimicking it as closely as possible, then tucked it into her notebook, sealed in plastic. She hid a small memo in a secret drawer under her desk. "If this case is reopened, find the copy in the second safe, bottom drawer." Meanwhile, Keller sat in his car in the lot, watching the light in Whitman's office. The chief's silhouette loomed behind the blinds. Keller recalled Whitman's words, "Sometimes being good means staying quiet," but he couldn't. He opened his notebook, adding, "Whitman tampered with file, must keep copies of all related documents." At 11, Whitman's office light went out. He left the building, a heavy briefcase in hand, hurrying to his car. From the second-floor window, Janet watched, streetlight glinting off his glasses, rendering his face featureless. She felt as if she'd seen something sink again, not a car but the truth, pressed deep into the dark. The next morning, Whitman declared the Becky Turner case closed. The report was sealed, labeled, "Accidental Drowning." The station went quiet as he signed. No one spoke, but all understood. The case didn't close because answers were found, but because someone wanted it over. By January 1980, snow began melting on Chelan's hills, exposing wet black soil and silver-gray trees. At the police station, end-of-year files were being cleared. On Robert Whitman's desk, the Rebecca Turner file, blended with routine paperwork, thin, tidy, bearing no trace of the disputes and doubts of the past 3 months. The typed cover read clearly, "Vehicle accident, no foul play suspected." The case was closed like dozens of others in the region. Meanwhile, in the evidence storage room, Officer Tom Keller reviewed the inventory for handover. Item hash 47, Colt .38 revolver, registered to Chelan County Sheriff's Office, possible link to case hash 79241, was crossed out in red ink, noted, "Missing, not recovered." Keller frowned. He remembered, the gun was listed in the initial report, tied to a 2-year-old theft of police equipment, and Whitman had first suggested checking if it matched a bullet mark on Becky's driver's seat. Now, it was erased from the record. He took the list to Whitman's office. "Sir, the Colt .38 from the Turner case isn't in storage." Whitman didn't look up, voice dry. "Might have been pulled in the wrong batch. Doesn't matter anymore, Keller. Case is closed. But it's department property. If it's missing, we need a report." Whitman cut him off. Eyes sharp as knives. "I said it's done. You hard of hearing." Keller gripped the list tightly. He knew he couldn't win this exchange, but the tightness in his chest wouldn't fade. Leaving the room, he heard Whitman on the phone, voice low, "Prep the press conference for tomorrow. We'll make the official statement." The next day, In the Chelan police station lobby, Whitman faced local TV cameras. Dressed in a crisp uniform, badge gleaming, he spoke firmly. After thorough investigation, we conclude Rebecca Turner died in an unfortunate traffic accident. No signs of foul play. The file will be archived per protocol. Behind him, a sign read Community Safety First. A reporter asked, "Any chance someone else was involved?" Whitman smiled lightly, shaking his head. No, Miss Turner was a victim of weather and carelessness, not crime. The quote ran verbatim on the Chelan Tribune's front page the next morning. At the station, Janet Lewis typed the final summary. Seeing "case closed" on the page weighed on her. As Whitman left, he signed the document and walked out. Once the door closed, Janet slipped Becky's letter copy from her pocket, studying it again. The blue ink had faded. "If something happens to me, look to the lake." She tucked it between notebook pages, locking her desk drawer. By month's end, Whitman was invited to Seattle for an Outstanding Achievement in Swift Case Resolution Award. A photo of him accepting the certificate ran in the paper, captioned "Sheriff Whitman, Model Citizen." He smiled, flash glinting off his silver badge. In the background, Keller stood at a distance, face half-lit, expression unreadable. Weeks later, Keller requested a transfer to traffic, citing personal stress. No one pressed him. Janet quit soon after, claiming she needed to care for her aging mother. Dr. Harlan Lewis was reassigned to Spokane under administrative adjustments. Everything passed smoothly, neatly, like cleaning a room before locking the door. In Chelan County's archive, case #79241 was filed under accidental deaths. The file, barely 12 pages, included the body recovery report, scene photos, the altered autopsy report, and Whitman's signed final page. No fingerprints, no blood analysis, no roadmap, no video footage, only gaps remain. An archivist, reviewing records, remarked, "Odd, an accident file this clean is rare." He chuckled, dismissing it. The file was shelved beside river drownings and snowstorm crashes. When the archive door closed, lights off, the room fell silent. Outside, spring arrived late. Lake Chelan reflected a clear sky, as if it had never held secrets. Townsfolk spoke of Becky Turner lightly, like a distant story. But for Keller, driving past Don Morse Park, the water still felt unsettled. Each ripple in the wind made him see a faint yellow glimmer of the Plymouth Duster, deep below, with secrets locked in the thin file #79241, now labeled, "Closed, Accidental." 40 years passed, and Lake Chelan remained calm, as if it never knew Rebecca Turner. The town changed. Old shops became bright cafes, and witnesses to the case faded away. In the Chelan County Archive, file #79241 sat on the fourth wooden shelf, paper yellowed, accidental label, peeling at one corner. It hadn't been opened in decades. Robert Whitman, the former sheriff, retired in 1999. He sold his Lakeview home, moved to Wenatchee, and lived quietly with his wife and a small garden. Occasionally, he was seen at a downtown diner, reading the paper, chatting with young officers like an old hero. No one mentioned Becky Turner, a closed accident. Tom Keller left the force 3 years later. He moved to Oregon, working as a boat repair technician, avoiding police work and unanswerable questions. In old age, he kept his dark leather notebook with faded scribbles, Whitman altered file, evidence missing, records removed. The ink blurred, but he couldn't bring himself to burn it. Janet Lewis, the former secretary, lived with her daughter in Portland. In her old cabinet, a thin sealed envelope remained, labeled in pencil, "Turner letter copy." She never spoke of that night, but sometimes, hearing of missing persons on TV, she thought of the young woman with brown hair and uneasy eyes, who left a message no one heeded. Time dusted everything over. At first, Chelan residents mentioned Becky at Don Morse Park. Then it became a tale. A young woman drove into the lake. A rainy night tragedy. Eventually, it sank into oblivion like countless small-town cases. Not until autumn 2017 did her name resurface. Daniel Turner, Becky's brother, now over 60 and a carpenter in Tacoma, watched a news segment on reopened cold cases using DNA technology. He paused, staring at the screen, as a young investigator said, "No case is truly closed. Some files just need a second look." The words kept him awake all night. The next morning, at a wooden desk, he pulled out his father's old typewriter and typed, hands trembling but firm. Under the Washington State Freedom of Information Act, I, Daniel Turner, immediate kin of victim Rebecca Turner, request review of case hash 79241, filed in 1979, managed by the Chelan County Sheriff's Office. The letter was mailed, simple and brief. Stepping outside, Daniel looked at the sky, feeling he'd stirred something buried with family memories. His mother died in 1992, carrying unanswered questions. His father stayed silent until his death, never mentioning his daughter. But for Daniel, silence was no longer an option. 3 weeks later, a reply arrived from the Chelan Sheriff's Office. A single type sheet, case hash 79241, is classified closed under Section 4.3 of County Investigation Code. No new evidence to reopen. Your request will be considered if circumstances change. The words were cold, detached. Daniel folded the letter, tossed it on the table, and gave a dry laugh. No new evidence, because they never looked. 3 days later, another envelope arrived. No return address. A faded yellow envelope, sealed with darkened tape. 3 words in slanted black ink. Ask about the gun. Daniel held it, his heart slowing a beat. Inside was a small note, torn from a notebook, repeating the same words. Ask about the gun. Nothing more, nothing less. No clear fingerprints, no signature. He glanced around. The house was silent, except for the clock's ticking. That night, he opened the old box of his sister's keepsakes. Photos, a 1978 postcard from Becky, and a crumpled newspaper, with the headline, "Young Woman's Body Found in Lake Chelan." He reread Whitman's interview. No signs of foul play, just a sad accident. The paper was creased, as if gripped in anger. Daniel searched online. Robert Whitman's name appeared, retired sheriff, Chelan County, Washington. A brief article praised his honest and dedicated service. Daniel read it repeatedly, a stone-like weight rising in his chest. He looked at the note on the table. Ask about the gun. His breath grew heavy. What gun? Who wrote this? And why, after nearly 40 years, was it sent to him? In February 2018, Seattle's rain fell relentlessly for 2 weeks. In the Washington State Patrol's archive room, fluorescent lights illuminated thousands of old files, brown boxes stacked like silent memories of the state. Maria Cortez, a new investigator from the federal unit, reviewed FOIA request logs. She paused at a line marked in red, case hash 79241, Chelan County, missing person inquiry, Daniel Turner. It seemed unremarkable, but a note caught her eye. Closed case, evidence partially lost. Maria tapped her pen on the desk. Evidence partially lost always irked her. In over 10 years on the job, she knew lost often meant deliberately withheld. She opened her computer, searching Chelan County's database. The 1979 file was poorly digitized. A few scanned pages from faded paper, some torn or blurred. But in the evidence record, a line was crossed out in red. Item hash 47, Colt .38 revolver, serial 6, of 4521, missing, presumed misplaced. Maria frowned. A Colt .38 was standard police issue in the 1970s, typically assigned to law enforcement. Why was it in an accident case file? She checked the investigating officer field, signed by Robert Whitman, sheriff. She printed the file, tucked it into a leather folder, and called Daniel Turner. I'm Investigator Cortez with Washington State Patrol, she introduced. You requested a review of your sister's case, Rebecca Turner? Daniel's voice was slow, hoarse with age. Yes, they said the file's gone. I figured you'd say the same. I'm not sure it's gone, Maria replied. Give me a few days. If I find anything, I'll reach out. 2 days later, Maria drove to Chelan, carrying an authorization letter and an order to access the old evidence storage. The vault was in the basement of the county police building, its entrance damp, walls coated with mold, and the smell of rusted metal. The archivist, a silver-haired man named Harold Dunn, led her through endless rows of shelves. This stuff's from the 70s, 80s. Nobody's touched it since the new headquarters opened. Boxes without labels? Good luck finding anything. Maria swept her flashlight over each box. Many were cracked, ties rotted, labels faded. After nearly an hour, she stopped at a cardboard box with a smudged label, 1979. Lake Chelan. Her heart beat faster. Inside was a thick nylon bag, sealed with old tape, covered in dust and cobwebs. The faded label was still legible. Evidence #47. Firearm, revolver, Colt .38, Chelan County. She opened the bag, taking a breath. Inside, a rusted revolver, its wooden grip worn, barrel coated in reddish-brown oxidation. She put on gloves, lifting it carefully. The serial number, 6A4521, was still clear on the frame. She noted it, photographed it, resealed it per protocol, and signed the log. This was never entered into the digitized system, she told Dunn. He shrugged. If no one asks, it just sits there. That evening, in the state forensics lab, Maria stood beside the firearms examiner. Under the microscope, dust and corrosion marks stood out starkly. The technician scraped the grip, collecting a few dried skin cells. Not much hope, he said. This thing's been sitting for decades, but 3 days later, the results silenced the room for a moment. A partial fingerprint, not enough for absolute confirmation, but a 73% match to the personnel file of former Sheriff Robert Whitman, retired since 1999. Maria reread the report, then flipped back to the old case file. The evidence log from that year was signed by Whitman himself. She drafted a concise internal report. Recovered evidence item #47, Colt .38 revolver, serial 6, A4521, previously marked missing. Partial fingerprint match to former Sheriff Robert Whitman. Recommend reopening case #79241 for verification of evidence chain. When she submitted it, her superior, Lieutenant Mark Cleary, called her into his office. He reviewed the documents and asked, "Cortez, do you know who Whitman is?" "The sheriff who handled the Turner case," she replied. "Not just that. He was awarded a Medal of Honor. In Chelan, he's seen as a symbol of justice. If you're stirring this up, you'd better have more than a rusty gun and a faint fingerprint." Maria nodded slightly. "I'm not stirring, sir. I'm following protocol." That evening she called Daniel Turner again. His voice trembled with age, but when Maria said, "I found the missing gun from your sister's case file," the line went quiet. After a pause, Daniel spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I knew it. I couldn't prove it, but I always knew they hid something. Thank you. You've started where they stopped." Maria hung up, looking out the window. Rain poured on the Chelan police station's roof, each drop like time melting away. In her mind, the image of the yellow Plymouth Duster sinking into the lake surfaced, and now a rusty gun rising from the past, carrying a single question: why was the lead investigator's fingerprint on missing evidence? She opened her notebook, writing the first line for the new case file, case #79241, reopened under review. Possible internal tampering. Investigator, Maria Cortez. Outside, the night rain tapped the glass, and in its sound, there seemed to be the faint clink of rusted metal, as if the past was speaking from beneath the cold mud of Lake Chelan. 2 weeks after finding the rusty gun, Maria Cortez couldn't stop thinking about the 3 words. Ask about the gun. Old clues were surfacing, but she knew a Colt .38 with a faint fingerprint wasn't enough to crack the case. She needed something undeniable. A document no one could alter with a few pen strokes. While reviewing the list of people tied to the 1979 file, Dr. Harlan Lewis's name appeared. He was Chelan County's former chief coroner, long retired and off the official contact list. Maria traced old medical records and found his address in Spokane, a small house nestled among pines, nearly 2 hours from the city. When she knocked, an elderly man with white hair and deep-set eyes answered. He glanced at her badge, nodding slightly. State Lampholder, State Patrol. It's been a while since anyone came here about that case, he said, his voice hoarse but alert. Maria opened her briefcase, placing a copy of the 1979 autopsy report from the archives on the table. I need to ask about this signature, sir. The report concludes death by drowning post-collision. Can you confirm this is yours? Lewis picked up the paper, putting on glasses. His eyes darkened. No, I didn't write this. I remember clearly during the autopsy, I concluded she died before submersion. Neck fracture, no water in the lungs. Do you have the original copy? Maria asked. Lewis hesitated, then stood, disappearing into another room. He returned with a worn brown envelope. I kept a copy. No one believed me, so I held on to it to protect myself. His report, typed on an old typewriter with faded black ink, bore the old coroner's office seal. The conclusion stood out. No water in lungs. Cervical fracture consistent with external impact. Death occurred prior to submersion. Recommendation: homicide investigation. Maria compared every word, every punctuation mark with the official Chelan file. The only difference, the 1979 public report replaced death occurred prior to submersion with death occurred due to vehicular impact during submersion. One word during changed the entire case's nature. She pulled out her phone, photographing both versions. I'll need to send these for ink and paper analysis. If yours was written in 1979, we can prove the official report was falsified. Lewis looked at her, voice hoarse. I've waited 40 years for someone to say that. But be careful, the person behind this wasn't ordinary. Back at the Seattle Forensics Lab, Maria handed both documents to the forensic specialist. They conducted spectral ink analysis, paper age testing, and typewriter imprint checks. A week later, the results came back. The ink on Lewis's report matched types used in the late 1970s, while the Chelan file's ink showed chemical markers from post-1986 production. The forged document's paper was also thicker, not matching that era's administrative forms. The final report stated, Document Bud, not contemporaneous with Document A. Strong indication of substitution or tampering. Maria printed the report, reading it again. This was what she needed, undeniable proof of deliberate tampering. She filed a confirmation report and sent it to Lieutenant Cleary. He skimmed it, sighing, Cortez, you're opening a door many want kept closed forever. That door was never truly locked, sir, she replied. That evening, Maria called Daniel Turner again. When he heard Lewis's name, his voice shook. My mother once said that coroner wasn't invited to my sister's memorial. Now I know why. Maria listened to the rain over the phone. Mr. Turner, your sister may not have died in an accident. We have evidence the report was falsified, and it's likely the person who altered it was the sheriff at the time. On the other end, Daniel didn't respond, only a long, heavy sigh. Then he whispered, I knew it, I just needed someone to say it for me. Maria hung up, returning to her desk. On the wall, a Washington state map held a small red pin at Chelan. Below it, an old black and white photo of Becky Turner, her face blurred by light, reflecting off the glass case. Maria looked into her eyes that seemed to hold something unsaid. She opened the digital file, typing the day's final entry. Confirmed forgery of official autopsy report. Authentic report indicates homicide. Responsible individual likely within Chelan County Sheriff's Office, 1979. Case hash, 79241 reclassified. Suspicious death. Outside, Seattle's rain tapped the glass like the slow rhythm of time. Cortez leaned back, closing her eyes. She knew once this report was sent, those who buried the case 40 years ago would feel the first stirrings of the past, like a crack in thin ice, signaling that what was hidden was about to surface from the lake's cold depths. On Tuesday noon, after nearly a month of reviewing old witnesses, Maria Cortez learned that Janet Lewis, the Chelan Sheriff's Office clerk in 1979, lived in Portland. Now in her 70s, she was off the official contact list, but her name appeared in the clerical section of the original report. Maria prepared her file, printed an old ID photo of Janet, and drove to Oregon in light rain. Janet's house sat in a quiet suburb, pale green walls, windows lined with geranium pots. When Cortez knocked, a slender woman with silver hair and bright eyes answered. "Miss Lewis?" Maria showed her badge. "I'm Investigator Cortez, Washington State Patrol. I need to talk about the Rebecca Turner case, 1979. The name made Janet pause. She pursed her lips, eyes distant. "I thought no one would mention that girl again." She invited Maria inside. The house was tidy, frozen in time. On the coffee table, a steaming teapot. On the wall, an old black and white photo of Chelan's police staff. Whitman in front, upright, Janet, 35 years younger, with a strained smile in the corner. As they sat, Janet poured tea, hands trembling slightly. "I know what you'll ask," she said before Maria spoke. "It's about the letter. You remember it clearly?" "Never forgot. I typed that report 40 years ago, and I saw Whitman take that letter from the file himself." Maria started her recorder. "Can you give details?" "The night before the file closed around 9:30, I was finalizing reports. Whitman came in, said he needed the Turner file. He flipped through, pulled a thin envelope. I saw blue ink, the first line. 'If something happens to me, look to the lake.' His voice was calm, told me to skip it because it muddies the information. Next day, when I checked, the envelope was gone." Janet paused, sipped tea, her hand tightening on the cup. "I knew then he wanted to bury something." Maria leaned in. "Did you keep a copy?" A brief silence. Janet looked out the window, rain streaking down. "I couldn't forget the words, so I copied it by hand. Didn't dare keep the original, afraid they'd find it. I've hidden that copy all these years." She stood, went to another room. A drawer creaked. She returned with a clear plastic envelope, inside a faded sheet, pale blue ink, shaky but clear. "If I disappear, look to the lake. Don't trust the badge." Maria's throat tightened. She gloved up, gently removing the paper. "I'll need this for handwriting analysis. But first, are you sure Becky wrote it?" Janet nodded. "She filed to change Whitman's patrol route before she vanished. I typed that form. The signature on the letter and the form, they're the same. I knew it instantly." Cortez sealed the paper, labeled, and signed it. "Miss Lewis, I know this isn't easy. Your statement could be the turning point." Janet gave a sad smile. "You know, when Whitman left the office for the last time, he told me, 'Don't forget, Janet. Silence is a form of loyalty.' I stayed silent nearly 40 years. Now I don't owe anyone loyalty." Days later, the handwriting analysis arrived at Cortez's desk. The 3-page report concluded, "Handwriting on document provided by witness Janet Lewis matches 100% with Rebecca Turner's signature and personal notes. No signs of forgery." Maria read the end, her heart heavy. The line, "Don't trust the badge," cut like a thin blade through lingering doubts. From that moment, the case was no longer about a car veering off. It was a buried cry for help. That afternoon, she called Lieutenant Cleary. "I have the victim's letter, verified handwriting. It shows she feared someone in law enforcement, and the last person to touch that file was Whitman." Cleary was silent for seconds. "You know what this means? If we push forward, we're touching someone who led the county. He has friends, reputation, people who owe him." Maria spoke slowly, each word firm. "I know, but he also has a gun with matching fingerprints on missing evidence. And now, a hidden letter." It's time the truth spoke. That evening, Maria drove back to Seattle. On the passenger seat, Becky's letter, carefully sealed. Streetlights reflected through the plastic, the slanted words glinting. "Look to the lake." She glanced in the rearview mirror. In a flash, Lake Chelan's surface appeared in her mind, calm and cold as metal, but beneath, something waited to be pulled into light. Cortez stopped at a roadside gas station, opened her notebook, and wrote a brief entry, her handwriting steady. Witness Janet Lewis provided victim's handwritten letter. Verified. Evidence suggests document suppression by Robert Whitman. Case #79241 redirected. Probable homicide. She looked up at the rain-soaked sky, thinking of the old woman in Portland, who kept silent for 4 decades, only to speak, in a small house scented with tea. 2 lines. Maria couldn't forget. I was afraid of him. Now I'm only afraid that, if I don't speak, the lake will keep it secret another 40 years. A week after obtaining Becky Turner's letter, Maria Cortez returned to Chelan. This time, not for files or witnesses, but to look at the water that swallowed the evidence for nearly half a century. The Washington State Patrol authorized a new site survey, with support from Olympia's underwater forensics team. That morning, fog blanketed Lake Chelan. The water, cold as a gray mirror, reflected the sky. At Don Morse Park, technicians prepped sonar equipment, modern machines able to detect metal objects smaller than 10 centimeters across hundreds of meters. Cortez stood with the team leader, forensic engineer Richard Vance, reviewing a digitized 1979 map marking the yellow Plymouth Duster's recovery site. She pointed to it. I want this area scanned, extended 150 yards north. Reports say the current here is strong. If metal was thrown in, it could have drifted far from the scene. Vance nodded, ordering the equipment lowered. 2 divers checked oxygen tanks as sonar began pinging. The screen showed wavy patterns. After 2 hours, mostly rocks, debris and broken iron frames appeared. But at over 100 yards from the car's site, a brighter-than-normal signal blinked. Vance zoomed in, the signal clear. A cylindrical object, about 25 centimeters long, with solid metal signature reflection. Something's here, he said. Depth 28 meters. Cortez circled the map coordinates. Mark it. Send divers down. The 2 divers, tethered with safety lines, carried cameras and sealing bags. As they descended, flashlights swept through mud and algae. In the dim glow, a small object glinted in the sand, its shape chillingly familiar. One diver spoke through the radio. I see it. It's a gun. Looks like a Colt. They gently freed it from the mud, sealed it in a waterproof bag, and it was pulled to the surface. When the gun was placed on the temporary exam table, everyone went quiet. Maria's throat dried. Beneath clinging mud, a dark wooden grip, a heavy barrel, Colt .38 Special, matching the one from the old evidence vault. She gloved up, inspecting the serial number. Rust obscured it, but infrared revealed faint digits. 6A 4563. Just a few units from the 6A 4521 in the file. Both guns were from the same 1978 batch, issued to Chelan County Police, Cortez said, reading the weapons issuance log. 6 Colt .38s, consecutive serials. One was reported missing in 1979. She looked at Vance. I think we just found it. The gun was sent to Olympia's forensics lab. After cleaning with a special solution, they found an unfired bullet in the chamber and faint lead residue around the muzzle. Chemical analysis showed the lid matched hollow point rounds used by police at the time. Maria cross-checked with 1979 scene photos, a black and white shot of the Plymouth Duster's driver's seat, a round hole in the seat back, about 0.38 inches. She zoomed in, using bullet trajectory software. The path ran straight from the back seat, angled 32 degrees. No bullet was recovered, only a brief note, possible puncture due to debris impact. Cortez sent the photos and data to ballistics. 2 days later they replied, hole size and shape fully consistent with a .38 special round. Cannot be random impact. She sat still, staring at the printout. The pieces were aligning. She wrote a report to her superiors. Discovery 2nd Colt .38 revolver, serial 6A, 4563, found 110 yards from 1979 vehicle recovery site. Ballistic match consistent with .38 caliber bullet hole observed in 1979 vehicle photographs. Strong probability weapon used in homicide, later disposed in lake. That night, Maria drove to Lake Chelan alone. The water's black depths reflected the moonlight. Still, she stood at Don Morse Park's edge, where Becky's car was pulled up nearly 40 years ago. In silence, she imagined that rainy night, a man in a police uniform in the back seat, Colt in hand, barrel aimed forward. A flash, a shot, then the car rolling down the slope, vanishing into the water. The gun tossed away, far enough from the scene to stay hidden. Cold wind off the lake carried the smell of wet metal and algae. Cortez opened her notebook, writing a brief, steady-handed note. Whitman likely used department-issued Colt to kill Rebecca Turner, concealed report, and discarded secondary weapon in lake to obscure chain of custody. She closed the notebook, gazing at the calm lake. Beneath its surface, 2 guns, one lost in storage, one thrown away, told the same story. A case called an accident was a murder covered by power and silence. Maria returned to her car, feeling the damp glass cold against her fingers. In the faint moonlight, her reflection merged with the water, like Becky Turner's image, waiting for someone to find her voice after 40 years submerged. Early in 2019, the Rebecca Turner investigation entered a new phase. After finding the second gun in Lake Chelan, Maria Cortez received state approval for a 3D scene reconstruction to pinpoint the bullet's trajectory and the shooter's position. All collected data, 1979 scene photos, evidence logs, post-recovery Plymouth Duster images, were sent to Olympia's Forensic Technology Lab. In a neon-lit room, technicians set up a 360-degree laser scanner. A large screen displayed the rusted car's digital model, its corroded frame, dents, and holes, digitized in detail. Cortez watched silently as the computer rebuilt the car's interior. Driver's seat, steering wheel, side door, back seat, all based on original photos and 1979 descriptions. Here's the hole in the driver's seat. Lead technician Ryan Holloway pointed at the screen. A red circle marked a 9.6 mm hole, matching a .38 special round. Now we'll calculate the trajectory based on the penetration angle. He entered parameters, drawing a virtual yellow line from the back seat through the driver's back. Downward angle 32 degrees, 5 degrees right, he read. Distance from muzzle to impact, 1.2 meters. Maria leaned in, studying the model. So the shooter sat directly in the back seat, right side, aiming straight at the victim's neck? Ryan nodded. Exactly. And that angle aligns perfectly with the C3-C4 fracture Dr. Lewis noted. Turner was shot from behind at very close range, just over a meter. A replica of the original seat was brought out, still bearing patches of old fabric from the case. Ryan shone UV light on the seat back. Tiny specks glowed faint silver. This is lead residue, he said. This pattern forms when a bullet passes through fabric at close range. A random impact wouldn't leave such concentrated lead. Cortez stared, a chill running down her spine. She recalled the 1979 photo of Whitman by the car, his face half-shadowed. That afternoon, the forensics team conducted a control firing test. They used a similar seat, placed at 1.2 meters, firing a Colt .38 with era-appropriate hollow point rounds. The resulting hole, burn marks, and fabric tears matched the seat from Becky's car. This can't be coincidence, Ryan said, saving the data. Maria stepped into the hall, calling Lieutenant Cleary. We've confirmed the firing trajectory. The bullet came from the back seat, 1.2 meters, matching the victim's neck injury. Cleary sighed on the line. So someone was in the back seat, shooting point blank. Exactly, and only someone with authority would let Becky feel safe with them behind her that night. You're talking about Whitman, who else? They fell silent. In the hall, the data printer hummed. Cortez returned, looking at the screen. The yellow line pierced the driver's seat, stopping at the neck. A heat map showed dense red at the base of the skull. On the screen's corner, a note, shot distance, 1.18, 1.24. M muzzle direction from rear seat, right side. Likely shooter position, back seat passenger. Ryan printed the results, placing them before her. Everything aligns. Angle, distance, lead residue, fabric tear structure. Turner couldn't have died from a crash. She was shot while alive. That night, Cortez sat alone in her office. On her desk, 2 photos, one of Becky Turner, one of Robert Whitman. Dim light fell on Whitman's old image, his confident eyes, jaw slightly set, the look of someone used to giving orders. She flipped to the forged autopsy report. Whitman's signature still bold in the corner. Now everything he buried was surfacing, piece by piece. Cortez opened the digital file, entering the day's report. Forensic 3D reconstruction of Turner vehicle confirms projectile trajectory consistent with rear seat shooter. Estimated distance 1.2 m, right-hand angle 32 degrees, correlates with cervical fracture. Lead residue on seat fabric supports close-range shot. Conclusion: homicide by firearm. She paused, adding a private line, not for the report, but for herself. If she died by a bullet, then justice for her will begin with that same bullet. As she turned off the lamp, the computer screen still displayed the 3D model hovering in the dark. A thin yellow line piercing from the back seat forward, like a fragile beam connecting 2 moments, the rainy night of 1979 and the winter of 2019, when the truth finally took shape. Outside, snow began to fall. In the wind, Maria heard something like metal clinking faintly, an echo of a gunshot buried for 40 years, now resurrected by light and science. After the 3D model results briefing, the Washington State Patrol Office was thick with attention Maria Cortez had never felt before. The pieces were connecting: the .38 bullet, the rear seat trajectory, the victim's letter, the missing gun. But one detail, if proven, would shift the case from suspicious to criminal: the forged signature on the autopsy report. She requested copies of all authentic handwriting and signatures from Dr. Harlan Lewis, the original coroner she'd met in Spokane. From the state archives, they sent 3 1979 originals signed by him, another autopsy report, an accident inspection log, and an internal medical form. Lewis's signatures were consistent: round strokes, slightly slanted right, with a distinct loop on the H. In contrast, the signature on the Rebecca Turner case's official report was starkly different: stiff strokes, left-leaning, a broken H, and a straight L. Even a layperson could see the discrepancy. Maria sent both versions to the Document Forensics Division in Olympia, along with Lewis's sworn statement that he'd never signed a report concluding death by drowning post-collision. She added a note to the analysis request: potential forgery by Supervisor Robert Whitman, then sheriff. 3 weeks later, the results arrived in a red-sealed envelope. The report, over 20 pages, was marked confidential. The first page's bolded conclusion read, "Signature labeled Harlan Lewis's on document ID 79-241, does not correspond to genuine hand patterns. Forensic handwriting analysis shows 84% structural similarity with writing samples of Robert Whitman. Conclusion: forged under pressure." Maria read each word slowly, a chill running down her spine. Forged under pressure meant the forger likely attempted a quick imitation under time constraints, without practice. It was an indefensible act. She presented the results to Lieutenant Cleary. He skimmed a few lines, removed his glasses, and rubbed his forehead. "Do you know what this means, Cortez? We don't just have a murder, we have official evidence of falsifying public records. Whitman could face criminal charges." Maria nodded, voice low. "I want to forward the file to the prosecutor's office. We need an independent reinvestigation committee." Cleary looked up, his gaze a mix of admiration and concern. "You're taking on a regional legend. He was elected 3 terms. Are you ready for the uproar this will cause?" "Justice doesn't depend on badges, sir," she replied, "especially when a badge was used to kill." The next day, Cortez visited Dr. Lewis to share the results. The old man sat by the window, hands trembling around a teacup. "When he heard your signature was forged, he closed his eyes briefly. I knew it," he whispered. "I saw that report under Whitman's name in 1980. They used it to strip my license. I lived 40 years labeled as wrong. You can't imagine what that feels like." He looked at Maria, eyes wet. "Thank you, not for clearing me, but for standing up for that girl at last." Back in Seattle, Cortez held a forensics team meeting. They projected 3 layers of data: Lewis's authentic signature, the Turner file's signature, and Whitman's from contemporary administrative documents. The handwriting analysis graph showed an 84% match, enough to confirm the same writer or someone mimicking Whitman's style. The document technician explained, Whitman's strokes have heavy hand pressure, emphasizing the start of each character, while Lewis's are light and even. Here, we see Whitman's pressure. Even the pen's imprint on the paper is as deep as his. Forged under pressure means it was done quickly, likely at a desk. Maria stared at the screen, the magnified strokes like bullet paths on paper. She recalled Janet Lewis's words, "He took the document from the office the night before the file closed." Now, that truth wasn't speculation, it was proven by science. She wrote a summary report. Autopsy report signature, verified as forged. Comparative analysis confirms high correlation with Robert Whitman's handwriting. Dr. Lewis's authentic statement contradicts official file. This falsification altered cause of death from homicide to accidental, directly influencing case closure in 1980. That evening, as others left, Cortez stayed in the office. Outside, the city drizzled, streetlights reflecting on the metal desk. She opened the photo file, Whitman in his 40s, in uniform by the lake-pulled car. His eyes then were resolute, confident, and now they seemed a challenge. She opened her notebook, writing the final line. It began with a forged signature. From there, a man hailed as a hero cast a shadow over an entire town. Maria closed the notebook and stood. In the dim light, the Chelan map hung on the wall, a red pin deep in the lake's location, where it all began and where it would soon end. Somewhere in the night silence, she imagined the sound of a fountain pen on paper, the distant echo of a forgery from 40 years ago. Now exposed by cold numbers, 84% match. Forged under pressure. On August 22, 2019, Maria Cortez received official approval to interview Robert Whitman, former Chelan County Sheriff, now 78. He lived with his wife in a small Wenatchee house overlooking the Cascade Range, where hills were covered in dry grass and morning fog. Cortez drove there on an overcast day, carrying a copy of the interview warrant, 2 case files, and a pocket recorder ready to go. Before leaving, she reviewed all evidence: the Colt .38 from the lake, the forged autopsy report, and Whitman's signature with an 84% match to the forgery. She knew this meeting wouldn't yield a confession, but it could provoke a reaction. And in investigations, reactions often spoke louder than words. Whitman's house sat at the end of a dirt road. When Cortez knocked, an elderly woman answered softly, "He's on the porch. His health isn't great." Cortez thanked her, crossed the yard, and saw a white-haired man with broad shoulders sitting on a wooden chair gazing out. Hearing footsteps, he turned. His pale blue eyes were still sharp, though his body trembled. "State Patrol, right?" he asked. "They said you wanted to talk about old business." "Yes, Mr. Whitman," Cortez replied, starting the recorder. "I'm reviewing the 1979 Rebecca Turner case. I have some questions." Whitman gave a faint smile, his voice carrying the old commander's tone. 40 years ago, I don't recall details, and I thought it was settled clearly." Cortez placed a file on the wooden table between them, opening it. Black and white photos spilled out, the yellow Plymouth Duster pulled from the lake, the seat with a round hole, and a scan of the forged signature. "Did you sign this?" she asked. Whitman glanced down, raising an eyebrow. "Don't remember, I signed hundreds of papers back then. If that's mine, it was just routine. But it's not Dr. Lewis's signature," Cortez said slowly. "It's yours. And because of it, Rebecca Turner's cause of death was changed from homicide to accidental drowning." A brief silence. Only the wind swept the yard. Whitman leaned back, arms crossed. "You're accusing an old man of something buried 40 years ago? I worked with the information I had back then, who talked about DNA or simulations like you do now." Cortez kept her voice steady. No one's accusing you, Mr. Whitman. I just want to know why the evidence log marked a Colt .38 as missing, the same type we found in the lake, 110 yards from the scene. Whitman's head snapped up. His eyes flashed something, brief, but enough for Cortez to notice. A gun, he said softly. You really found it? Cortez leaned forward, holding his gaze. Yes, and it has a fingerprint with a 73% match to yours. For a moment, Whitman's hand on the chair's armrest tightened, veins bulging. Nonsense, he said, voice rising. I never took that gun to the lake. It was lost in storage before then. Was it? Maria opened the second file, pulling out the 1978 Sheriff's Office weapons issuance log. Records show Colt .38, serial 6A, 4563, signed out by you. And that's the one we pulled from Lake Chelan. Whitman fell silent. A gust flipped papers on the table. He no longer looked at Cortez, his eyes drifting to a distant lake in memory. You don't understand, he said, voice low. That whole system back then, no one wanted the truth. Everyone just wanted calm. Including you? Cortez asked. He turned back, eyes suddenly blazing, voice erupting like a stifled growl. I did what I had to. You know what pressure's like? The press, the town, the county, all demanding I close it fast. A girl died, and if I didn't act quick, my career, my department, gone. Cortez stayed silent, watching. Whitman's anger surged, then ebbed like a wave. He exhaled, chuckling bitterly. You know, people can't handle 40 years of silence. I hear water in my dreams. Every night. She tilted her head, voice soft. Is it the sound of the gun or her? Whitman locked eyes with Cortez. His gaze clouded, lips trembling slightly. She didn't deserve to die, he said faintly, almost to himself. She knew too much. Cortez's pulse quickened. Knew what, sir? But Whitman clamped shut. She saw he realized his slip. He laughed, shaking his head. I'm old. Sometimes I ramble. You should turn off that recorder. Maria didn't respond. She stood, carefully closing the device, switching it off. But the backup recorder in her vest pocket kept running. She gave him a cold smile. Thank you for your time, Sheriff. I may be back. Leaving the porch, Cortez glanced back. Whitman sat motionless, broad shoulders slumped, eyes following the gray sky. On the table, wind flipped the old report, exposing the bolded cause of death. That night, in her office, Maria replayed the recording. Whitman's voice came through, gravelly, sometimes unsteady, especially when mentioning the gun. At the 18th minute, she caught 3 broken sentences. She knew too much. I didn't mean, but they, then a long silence, followed by a creaking chair. Cortez paused the tape, leaning back. For the first time in 40 years, Robert Whitman had cracked. Not with a confession, but with a fracture in his voice, an unmaskable sound. She opened the file, writing the day's final report entry. Interview conducted at Whitman residence, Wenatchee. Subject denies involvement, but exhibits stress markers and verbal hesitation when questioned about firearm. Statement, she knew too much recorded. Emotional reaction indicates possible consciousness of guilt. Outside, rain fell again. Through the glass, she saw her reflection blend with the old man she'd just left. 2 generations on opposite sides of a mirror, where the truth was finally emerging. In February 2024, 5 years after the Wenatchee meeting, the Rebecca Turner case was reopened for the 3rd time, no longer a cold case, but an official criminal investigation. Over the past half-decade, Maria Cortez persisted, gathering more statements, evidence, and awaiting final forensic results. That month, an unexpected find from Olympia's forensics lab pushed the case into an irreversible phase. While reviewing 1979 original documents, a technician noticed a faint brownish stain in the corner of the old evidence log, the one with the forged Harlan Lewis signature. Assumed to be ink smudging, under fluorescent microscopy, it glowed orange. Characteristic of long-dried blood protein. The tiny sample was extracted and sent to Washington's DNA lab for next-generation sequencing, sensitive enough to read genetic markers from a 40-year-old sample. 3 weeks later, Cortez got a call from the lab. The technician's voice was urgent. "We have results. The blood on the file matches Rebecca Turner's DNA perfectly. Random match probability, 1 in 72 billion. Maria sat still, watching rain lash the window. The blood was on the forged document, signed by Whitman in place of Lewis. It meant when he altered the file, it bore Becky's blood. It couldn't be coincidence. She felt the 40 years of Lake Chelan's silence break with a sharp snap. The imagined click of handcuffs closing. She immediately sent a report to the Chelan County Prosecutor's Office with all evidence. 2 Colt .38s from the same issuance batch. 3D bullet trajectory, confirming a rear seat shot. Forged, Harlan Lewis signature. Becky's DNA on the forged document signed by Whitman. The 2019 interview tape, where he said, "She knew too much." 3 days later, Chief Prosecutor Ellen Crawford signed an urgent request to Chelan County Court. In a 42-page document, she wrote, "Forensic evidence establishes a direct link between document forgery and an attempt to conceal a deliberate murder. Based on forensic results, witness testimonies, and the 2019 recording, we have sufficient grounds to designate Robert Whitman, former Chelan County Sheriff, as the primary suspect in the 1979 murder of Rebecca Turner." On March 8, 2024, Judge Harold Monroe signed the arrest warrant. The bold text was cold and final: warrant for arrest. Robert D. Whitman charges murder in the second-degree forgery and evidence tampering. Cortez joined the arrest team. They drove to Wenatchee at dawn on March 12, 2024. The sky was gray, mist rising from the ground. The small house at the dirt road's end was as she remembered: quiet, windows shut, thin smoke curling from the chimney. As they parked, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Cortez approached the porch, knocking 3 times. A hoarse voice called out, "Who's there?" "Washington State Patrol, Mr. Whitman. We have a warrant for your arrest." The door cracked open. Whitman appeared, thinner, hair disheveled, in a gray sweater. He saw Cortez and gave a faint smile, like recognizing an old acquaintance. "I knew you'd come back," he said softly. "Sooner or later." "I'm sorry, sir," Maria replied, voice calm. "You're under arrest for second-degree murder, forgery, and evidence tampering. You have the right to remain silent and to an attorney." Whitman didn't resist. He extended his hand slowly as Cortez approached with cuffs. Cold metal touched his skin, the click echoing in the damp morning. As they led him to the car, he glanced back at the house. "You know," he said quietly, "I thought the lake could keep a secret forever," Cortez replied, voice steady. "The lake doesn't keep secrets, only people think it can." The convoy left Wenatchee in silence. In the patrol car's back seat, Whitman stared out the window, his face reflected in drifting fog. As the car turned onto the highway, the sun rose behind the Cascades, casting pale gold on his handcuffs. In Chelan, news spread faster than any call. Local media led the morning broadcast. Breaking: former Chelan County Sheriff Robert Whitman arrested in 45-year-old murder case. TV channels replayed young Whitman's images, smiling, shaking hands at the 1980 commendation ceremony, badge gleaming. Now screens showed an elderly man, eyes sunken, hands cuffed. That day, Cortez submitted her longest career report, nearly 400 pages, filed under a new case number, Case 79241R State Viz. Whitman. In the introduction she wrote, "A single blood stain on a page brought down a 45-year curtain of concealment. Evidence doesn't die. It only waits long enough for someone to listen." That evening, back at her hotel, Cortez opened the window overlooking Lake Chelan. The water was still as a mirror, reflecting moonlight. She knew tomorrow the media would swarm, lawyers would speak, and Whitman's admirers would rage. But in that moment, she felt a stillness, not of concealment, but of a promise fulfilled. She opened her notebook, writing the final line for March 12, 2024. After 45 years, Lake Chelan finally spoke. And the man who ordered the truth, buried, now faces it. On July 17, 2024, Chelan County Courthouse was packed. Outside, dozens of reporters lined up from early morning. Inside, white light from high windows spilled onto the wooden table where the Washington State Prosecutor's Office presented evidence in the preliminary hearing for State vs. Robert Whitman, dubbed the longest cold case ever brought to trial in the state. Chief Prosecutor Ellen Crawford stood in the courtroom, voice resolute. Your Honor, today we present 27 pieces of physical evidence, 6 witness testimonies, and 2 DNA analyses, all pointing to one conclusion: Rebecca Turner's 1979 death was not an accident, but a murder in the second degree committed by the man seated behind the driver, Mr. Robert Whitman. She approached the evidence table, where sealed bags and samples were neatly arranged, each tagged with a number. Exhibit 1, she said, holding a plastic bag with the rusted gun. Colt. 38. Serial 6. A4563, recovered from Lake Chelan in 2018, matching the type and batch issued to Mr. Whitman in 1978. Exhibit 2, she continued, raising an enlarged photo of the hole in the Plymouth Duster's driver's seat. A 0.38-inch hole, consistent with Colt ballistics. 3D analysis confirms the bullet's path from the back seat, passenger position, to the victim's neck at 1.2 meters. On a large screen, a digital model appeared, reconstructing the car on that rainy October 1979 night. The detailed reenactment showed dim light, a shadowed back seat, a bullet piercing the seat, and the front figure slumping lifelessly. The courtroom was silent. When the model paused, only the projector's hum remained. Crawford continued. Exhibit 5, the original autopsy report by Dr. Arlen Lewis, stating the victim died before submersion, and the forged copy signed by the defendant. Both have been verified for age, ink, and handwriting, concluding forged under pressure. A technician took the stand, explaining the process. We used Raman spectroscopy, ink analysis, and stroke comparison. Results: the defendant Whitman's signature matches the forged Harlan Lewis's at 84%. This is forgery. He displayed an enlarged image of both signatures side by side. As the lights dimmed for slides, blue light fell on Whitman's face, aged, impassive. He sat motionless, hands clasped, eyes blankly fixed on the screen. Cortez, seated behind the prosecution, watched his every subtle reaction. He blinked only once, when the next slide showed the paper with dried blood in the corner, DNA tested. Crawford's voice hardened. Exhibit 14, DNA sample from blood on the forged document. Analysis confirms a match to Rebecca Turner with a 1 in 72 billion probability. This means when Mr. Whitman altered the file to cover the crime, it bore the victim's blood. This cannot be coincidence. The defense objected, claiming contaminated evidence and uncertain blood timing. But a forensic expert countered. The hemoglobin protein structure shows oxidation consistent with over 40 years. It cannot be fabricated. Your Honor, only 2 possibilities exist. Either Rebecca Turner wrote that report, or her blood got on it the night she died. Both tie Mr. Whitman to the scene. Next, the prosecution presented Janet Lewis's testimony, the former clerk who kept Becky's letter copy. Her recorded voice played on the screen. He told me, "Don't forget, Janet, silence is loyalty. I stayed silent for 40 years, but I saw him take that letter from the file. I knew he wanted to bury that girl." Then Daniel Turner, the victim's brother. "I received an anonymous envelope saying ask about the gun. I believe it came from someone inside, wanting peace of conscience." The prosecution's final evidence stirred the courtroom. It was a restored October 1979 weather report from National Archives. Crawford explained, on the night of October 12, 1979, Chelan recorded 0.03 inches of rain, winds under 5 miles per hour. Not enough for a landslide or vehicle drift. The 12-degree slope at Don Morse Park, per technical records, couldn't cause a car to slide. This means the Plymouth Duster didn't roll into the lake due to weather or accident. It was pushed by external force. On the screen, a new 3D model appeared, reenacting the scene, a man in a police uniform pushing a lifeless car, its front wheels tilting toward the water. The simulated force was 400 pounds, matching an adult's strength. The car rolled slowly, then sank beneath the cold water. Crawford faced the jury. "We can't go back to witness it, but science can. And science shows Rebecca Turner didn't slide into the lake. She was shot, and her car was pushed to hide the crime." The courtroom air grew heavy. Some in the audience bowed their heads. Cortez watched Whitman. He remained silent, but his shoulders trembled slightly. Anger or exhaustion, unclear. At the hearing's end, Judge Monroe spoke briefly. "The court confirms the request to detain defendant Robert Whitman until the formal trial. Evidence is admitted." The gavel struck 3 times. Outside, the press surged. A reporter asked Cortez as she left, "After 45 years, do you believe justice will prevail?" She answered simply, voice low but firm, "It's not justice prevailing, it's that time can't protect lies forever." On the road out of Chelan, she saw the lake stretching wide, its surface gilded by the afternoon light. There, 45 years ago, a young woman was pushed down with her yellow car. Now, the scene reconstruction had been publicly shown in court, and for the first time, the light of science pierced the darkness that power once tried to hide. In October 2024, 45 years after the night Rebecca Turner vanished by Lake Chelan, the Chelan County Superior Court courtroom was packed. Outside, hundreds of reporters and residents lined up in the chilly autumn air. They came not just to follow a trial, but to witness a town confronting its own past. At the defendant's table, Robert Whitman sat upright, his gaunt hands clasped, facing a clear partition. In a gray suit, his face was calm to the point of coldness. At 78, he still carried the commanding presence of a former regional sheriff, but his eyes held something shattered, pride eroded by memory and fear. Across from him, Maria Cortez sat behind the prosecution table, a file nearly 1,000 pages thick, labeled, "State First." Whitman, 79-241R. When Judge Harold Monroe entered, the room stood. He struck the gavel 3 times, his voice steady. "The trial of Robert D. Whitman, charged with murder in the second-degree forgery and evidence tampering, now begins." Chief Prosecutor Ellen Crawford opened the presentation. She stepped to the podium, hand on a stack of documents, and looked directly at the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we address not just a case, but a truth distorted for 45 years. In this case, evidence doesn't lie. Only people do." Her words echoed in the silent courtroom. She continued, "In 1979, Rebecca Turner was shot with a Colt .38, issued to the Chelan Sheriff's Office. The man who signed for that gun was the defendant, Robert Whitman. He altered the autopsy report, forged a signature, and hid the truth with the power and badge he wore on his chest. When we reopened the file, science spoke. DNA, ballistics, and document analysis all aligned. Only one person lied. The man who swore to uphold justice." Crawford held up a photo of Becky Turner, her bright smile at 25 projected on a large screen. She could have been a teacher, a mother, a wife. But someone with power took that away and called it an accident. Ladies and gentlemen, accidents don't forge signatures, erase evidence, or wipe away blood. As the prosecution played the scene reconstruction video, cold light from the projector fell on Whitman's face. He stared at the 3D model, where a bullet pierced the driver's seat, and Becky slumped silently. No expression, only a slight twitch of his finger when the simulated gunshot rang out, a sharp bang that made some in the room flinch. The defense attorney, Patrick Keene, countered with a familiar argument. "Your Honor, there are no direct witnesses, no footage of the shooting. All evidence is circumstantial." He held up a file. "The fingerprint is only a 73% match, not absolute. The blood could be contamination. We're talking about events 40 years ago, faded memories, degraded evidence. You cannot convict a man on speculation. But in rebuttal, Cortez stood, her voice firm. Speculation can't bring the dead back, but science can speak for them. We have 2 Colt. .38 Seth from the same batch. A bullet hole through the driver's seat. Blood DNA on a forged file. A signature matching Whitman's at 84%. And a recording where he admits. She knew too much. If this is all coincidence, then history has never seen a more perfect string of coincidences. As Cortez sat, her gaze swept over Whitman. He remained silent, neither admitting nor denying. She saw his lips tighten, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple, despite the courtroom's chill. In the final cross-examination, Dr. Harlan Lewis, now in his 80s, took the witness stand. His voice trembled but was resolute. In 1979, I said she died before submersion. I signed that report. But when the public version came out, my signature had become someone else's. For 40 years, I carried the label of liar. Now, I only want to say one thing. The truth didn't drown with that woman's body. The jury took notes relentlessly. A heavy atmosphere enveloped the room. Each detail, each piece of evidence, wove together like a slow, somber symphony, leaving no room for doubt. After 3 days of trial and 12 witnesses, the case moved to closing arguments. Crawford stepped to the podium, speaking without notes, her voice low and steady. For 40 years, people spoke of Mr. Whitman as a hero. But true heroes don't hide the blood of the innocent under a report. We're not here for revenge, but to prove that justice has no expiration date. If this court stands for what's right, then today, Rebecca Turner's name will no longer be tied to the word accident. She paused, looking at Whitman. You once told an employee, silence is loyalty. But justice doesn't need blind loyalty. Justice needs only the truth. For the defense, Keene appealed to pity. The defendant is nearly 80, frail, and served his community his whole life. Does the justice you seek still matter when it only brings a sentence for this weakened man? But the jury didn't look at him. The 12, 8 men, 4 women, faced the judge. Whitman was allowed final words. He stood slowly, scanning the room, his gaze passing unfamiliar faces, before stopping at Cortez. You got what you wanted, he said softly, but you don't know the cost. It's not me, Cortez replied. It's her. Judge Monroe signaled. The jury was led to a private room to deliberate. The door closed, and for the next 12 hours, Chelan's courthouse barely breathed. Reporters waited in the halls, residents gathered in the cold, and Cortez sat alone in a waiting room, eyes on the open file on her lap. Becky Turner's photo, her smile frozen in 1979's light. When the door opened, the 12 jurors emerged. No one spoke. The foreperson handed a sealed envelope to the judge. Monroe read slowly, voice steady. On the charge of murder in the 2nd degree, the jury finds guilty. On the charge of forgery, guilty. On the charge of tampering with evidence, guilty. The courtroom fell silent. Then murmurs erupted like a gust. Whitman sat still, eyes closed, head slightly bowed. No reaction. Only his hands trembled faintly on the table. Judge Monroe struck the gavel, his voice heavy as stone hitting the courtroom floor. Defendant Robert D. Whitman, you are convicted of 3 charges: murder in the 2nd degree, forgery, and evidence tampering. For the primary charge, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without parole, plus 15 years for the remaining charges to be served consecutively. A small stir rose in the courtroom, then faded. Cortez sat still, her heart pounding, not from triumph. Before her, the man once hailed as a symbol of justice sat quietly, overhead light, casting shadows on his time-worn face. Whitman's eyes stared blankly at his hands. The hands that held the Colt .38 in 1979, signed a forged report to hide a crime, now bound in cold steel cuffs. Judge Monroe added, voice gravelly, no title, medal, or years of service may stand above the truth. You betrayed what you swore to protect. Outside the court, wind swept through the pines, the first snowflakes of the season falling on the plaza. The crowd was silent. A few scattered claps rose, then stopped, like a ritual farewell to justice finding its way home. Cortez looked up at the gray sky, clouds drifting over Lake Chelan in the distance, where it all began. She thought of Becky, of the letter hidden for 4 decades. If I disappear, look to the lake. And now, the lake had given back the voice of one silenced for 45 years. Cortez walked slowly down the courthouse steps, opened her notebook, and wrote the final 4 words of this case. Words she knew would echo in future investigation classes. Justice came home. The story of Rebecca Turner and the 45-year journey to solve her case is not just a criminal investigation resolved by technology, but a powerful reminder of the value of accountability, transparency, and perseverance in modern American society. In an era where DNA forensics, digital data, and artificial intelligence are reshaping justice, the Chelan case shows an unchanging truth. Justice exists only when people dare to confront their own mistakes. In the story, Robert Whitman represents the shadow of power, a man who used reputation and position to distort the truth. In contrast, Maria Cortez and her team symbolize a new generation, believing that truth can be restored through science and resolve. Thanks to a single bloodstain on a page and the re-examination of a supposedly closed file, they forced the American justice system to confront itself. In today's United States, this reflects an ongoing struggle for transparency in government and law enforcement, where citizens have the right to demand truth, and public institutions are obligated to be accountable. The most important lesson comes from Cortez's own words: justice has no warranty period. It reminds every American, whether police, journalist, or ordinary citizen, that they must uphold responsibility to the truth, not just when convenient, but especially when inconvenient. The Rebecca Turner case teaches that silence is a form of complicity, and sometimes, just one person refusing to stay silent, like Cortez, can shift an entire system. Justice isn't automatic. It's the result of faith, science, and honesty, core values American society must continue to protect daily. If you believe that justice, no matter how long buried, deserves to be found, subscribe to our channel to join us in exploring more forgotten truths. Thank you for following along. See you in the next video, where another cold case will be reopened, and light will once again shine into the darkness.